deal. Well, I'll get started and hopefully, it lives up to the hype. I think Sherry might have talked me up a little bit too much, but we'll see. Hopefully this is beneficial for everyone. All right. So hello, everybody. Thanks for joining. I'm here to talk about kind of a state of the union of where we're at with apps, Copilot, and agents when it comes to the Power Platform. So we've had, I don't know about you, but I struggle to keep up with all the changes that are happening on a daily basis. So we're going to try to untackle some of the mystery there of some of the newest things and what you need to think about in terms of how do I build Power Platform solutions today with all this AI capability. So let's start by talking about something that you hear Microsoft really likes to talk about a lot, and that is this frontier firm journey, right? So in every keynote and every session at the big events, you hear a lot about this, where talking about, patterns that you follow from humans with assistants to humans, agent teams, all the way towards human-led and agent-operated patterns. So I don't know about you, but I always wonder, what do they actually mean by a frontier firm? And if we break it down, it's really just a fancy word for a company that does things with AI. So if you're doing something with AI and using some of these new capabilities that we're going to be talking about today, you're technically a frontier firm. So a lot of the features and the new ones that we might be looking at are in what we call the frontier program, meaning that they're just kind of early releases of some of these capabilities that you can test out and start getting your hands on. All right, so with that out of the way, let's talk about the kind of AI power trio that we have when it comes to Power Platform. So everything we're going to be looking today is going to be a mixture of Microsoft 365 Copilot, apps from the Power Apps standpoint, and agents, and how all of those kind of seamlessly work together to enable us to build holistic solutions these days. So from the Copilot standpoint, when we talk about Copilot, we're talking about that natural language interface for people that's embedded into your Microsoft 365 apps, basically all the stuff Sherry just showed us, right? So we don't have to context switch, it's just baked into the applications that we're using. From the app side, this is Power Apps. So we have that structured environment where we can work and build these applications with low-code tools and extensible with pro-code as well. And the big benefit there, having that access to over 1,000 plus connectors that we can just plug and play with different services. And then the agent standpoint. So agents, we have agents in Microsoft 365 Copilot, but also we'll be touching on Copilot Studio and how we can build our own custom agents plus workflows with agent flows. All right, so let's give a start here with going a little bit into Copilot and some of the things that we can do here. Now, I don't want to duplicate too much of what Sherry was talking about here, but really with Microsoft 365 Copilot, we're just talking about that unified AI experience. But I want to show some of the Power Platform-esque tools that we have available to us now in Microsoft 365 Copilot. And one of those is Agent Builder. So when you use Agent Builder, so if you go into Microsoft 365 Copilot and you see that Create an Agent tab, what you're actually using to build this agent is Copilot Studio behind the scenes. So all this is doing is giving you a more lightweight version of Copilot Studio where we can do things like define your instructions, describe what you want the agent to do. And if you go to that Configure tab, you can specify the knowledge. So of course it has all the work IQ graph knowledge, but you can kind of fine tune it and say, hey, only show knowledge and pull knowledge from this particular SharePoint site or these OneDrive files and mix and match that along with your instructions. And you can add a few capabilities like, do you want it to be able to use code interpreter or generate images? And then you can have starter prompts. But beyond that, that's pretty much all you can do. And this is great, and it's a really good starting point for a lot of scenarios. If you just want to basically take what Microsoft 365 Copilot is good at, but then add on kind of your more custom instructions for that, like we're seeing here in this scenario for a customer feedback agent, and to be able to create those executive summaries, that's a good use case, right? We'll talk a little bit later on about how, well, what if you want to do a little bit more and you want to have more fine-grained control and maybe add some extra tools and being able to leverage that connector model that Power Platform provides us in your agents. That's where you'd want to go full Copilot Studio, and we'll take a look at that here in a little bit. But Agent Builder in Microsoft 365 is Copilot Studio under the hood, and it's a good starting point to create a simple, lightweight agent that you use inside of Microsoft 365 Copilot. So what else do we have in here? You might have noticed that we have also some additional capabilities that lit up in Microsoft 365 Copilot, things like App Builder. So I'm going to be diving into this a little bit later on when we get into the Power Apps section, but this is essentially a specialized agent in Copilot to let you build lightweight, kind of more personal productivity apps. So with this, as you can see, you can put in a prompt like, hey, I need an app to help me capture milestones and work towards my career goals. And it uses what it's built to do with like generative orchestration and generative apps to build a kind of fully functioning app for you with code, but using a prompt-based experience. And I'll address some questions as we go along because I do see one from Chris here in the chat back on the agent builder topic. Can you tell it to grab a particular SharePoint site but exclude specific document libraries from the knowledge base? So you can't do that natively. So it's if you're going to do an entire SharePoint site, then it's going to get everything. You can't really kind of pick and choose what it's going to pull from there. So it's either you pick individual kind of files or libraries, or you do the whole site and it gets it all. So that's kind of your options there. Okay, and then what is the difference between App Builder and vibe coding? Great question. I'm going to get to that a little bit later on in the presentation. I have a whole section on that, so we'll get to that in a second. So just know that, App Builder is a thing. It's baked in a Microsoft 365 Copilot. The apps that you build there with this agent, you can only consume and use there. I'll talk a little bit more about what that means in a second. But the other big agent that we have in Copilot is the Workflows agent. So this, again, is leveraging Power Automate under the scenes. So you're going to see a lot of the Power Platform products showing up to enable capability in Copilot here. So what we can do is we have a specialized kind of fine-grained set of triggers and connectors that this workflow agent can connect to. So things like triggering off of Outlook, being able to connect to Teams, things like that. This agent can help you automate things with that. So if I want to do some email routing when I have a bug, right, and automatically kind of send a confirmation or a thank you and a message in Teams, this would be a good use case for this workflow agent. Think of it as a very lightweight, small subset of Power Automate capabilities that you create with this honestly kind of vibe workflow type functionality. You never see the underpinning, the actual edit screen of the automation. It's all prompt based and it's going to kind of show you what it's thinking, what it's building with the trigger, and it will set up that automation for you. So lightweight task with those small subset of connectors that it enables, like Outlook, Teams, SharePoint, and things like that. So that's another thing that we have. I can look a little bit more on that later on, but I want to get into the app section because this is where we're seeing a lot of innovation in the Power Platform space specifically beyond just agents. So for a long time, when we built Power Apps, right, it's always been the choice of model-driven applications or Canvas applications. And for a long time as well, we've had this ability to use Plan Designer, right? And we could put in a prompt and it would create this holistic plan and use a team of agents behind the scenes. Like we have a requirements gathering agent that goes and first verifies what you put in your prompt and what it needs to build. So it creates user stories for us of who would actually be using this after we put in the prompt. And then it calls a data modeling agent, which actually goes and suggests the data structure that we need for this particular application. And then there's an app building agent. And it suggests, hey, this should be a model-driven app. This should be a Canvas app. Maybe you need a workflow automation as part of this process, a Power BI dashboard. And it really suggests that for us and helps us build. So we've had this for a few years now. It's worked pretty well. But what it didn't do up until recently is it would take us all the way towards building kind of a generic model-driven or Canvas application. The UI left a lot to be desired because there wasn't a piece that we can plug in to help us with generating that user experience until now. So what we're getting into now and starting to see is the concept of true vibe coding in the Power Platform. And really the benefit of vibe coding in the Power Platform, there's a ton of tools, is that it does give us that safe space to create these applications. So doubt a lot of us don't know what vibe coding is at this point, but just to kind of level set on what I mean when I say vibe coding, it's really just a coin termed by someone in one of the AI companies where you embrace the AI poweredness of the software generation and ignore the fact that code even exists. So kind of taking away that kind of code aspect and just really vibing, with it and with the prompts and going back and forth with the AI model to generate the code for you. So there's, lots of ups and downs in the news if you followed along with some of the other tools people are using for this. It's really powerful, but then also if you're not using this in an environment that is contained, it can be really scary. You have people building and vibe coding applications that are leaking their API keys and getting, $100,000 bills because people are kind of using that to their advantage, right? So you got to know what you're doing if you're using some of these other tools with vibe coding. But when it comes to the Power Platform, it really helps us do that in a safe, controlled manner. Because when we look at the overall vibe coding landscape, there's multiple ways that we could go about this, right? There's more of a prompt-based approach that's like AI-generated apps. So obviously, Power Platform and Power Apps isn't the only one of those. ChatGPT, Copilot, things like Lovable, OutSystems, they all have their own kind of prompt-based AI generation tools. But on the other end of the spectrum, we can vibe code with AI assisted full stack. So this is your GitHub Copilot, your Claude Code, Cursor. So those are, you're in a developer IDE. You can see and edit the code and just kind of vibe the code there, but you do have complete control over the code. So on this end of the spectrum, prompt-based, you're relying solely on prompts and you typically can't manipulate the code that it's creating for you directly. But on the AI assisted full stack, you see the code, you just use prompting and the AI tools to help you generate it, but you have complete control to edit that code and do what you need to do. So it just really depends on your use case, what your comfort level is, what you're trying to do, over which tool you use, and maybe it's a combination of these. But Power Apps fits squarely kind of in the middle there because, as we'll look at in a minute, there are more AI-assisted tools for Power Apps, but also that kind of full IDE experience we could take advantage of as well. Now, when I mentioned that this is a safe space where vibe coding, or you might hear people also refer to this as vibe engineering, because I think vibe coding kind of undersells what you're doing a bit, because it's not only about the code. You have to consider, well, where are you hosting this? What is your security, right? What are your integrations? So it's really more than just the code. It's more like vibe engineering a solution. So with Power Platform versus, say, using another kind of cloud platform as a service configuration here, the benefit really is you don't have to worry about the deployment of it because it's going to be deployed in Power Apps in the Power Platform. And when you don't have to worry necessarily about the deployment, it means you don't have to necessarily worry about the authentication either because since you're using Power Apps in the platform, it's going to be built with Intra, no code, additional code is required there to support that. As far as connectivity goes, you don't have to, build and manage all of these connections because you can just use the connector model that the Power Platform has to offer. Hosting is included, deployment's already baked in, security and governance. So you really, as I say, get that safe space to build without having to worry about all this other stuff if you were to use another tool, right? Now, there are multiple ways, as I mentioned before, that we can go about embracing vibe coding in the Power Platform and Power Apps. So that app builder experience that we looked at, that is kind of a simple starting point. It's no code, it's all prompt based, and it's more for if you want those personal productivity applications to get started with. Now for builders, if you're already building Power App solutions, then we have two different options. So if you're using model-driven applications, we have generative pages that you can vibe code specific pages for your model-driven apps. And then we also have the new vibe.powerapps.com experience, which lets you build fully vibe-coded, full code applications with prompts. Now, if you are a pro dev or you're comfortable with opening up Visual Studio Code and like actually manipulating the code, we have code apps. So those are, you create them in Visual Studio Code and then you deploy the application to Power Apps. So Vibe.powerapps.com and Code Apps are the same underlying technology. It's just how you build them differ, whether you build them in the prompt-based experience in the browser or whether you build them in Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code. All right, so that's our spectrum. Let's dive deeper into each one of these. So again, starting with that app builder experience. So this is a no-code way to build our applications in Microsoft 365 Copilot. Benefits here is it gives us instant deployment to Copilot, so we don't have to worry about where people are going to be using it. It's natively in there. Now, as I mentioned, it's not going to be something that you're going to build for really enterprise-wide applications. This is more for personal or maybe small team. You know, you can share it with your coworkers. It does have kind of the security and governance baked in, and all the design capabilities and administrative control, which is great. But if we kind of dive into this a little bit deeper, what's going on behind the scenes between if we use App Builder or Power Apps? So both are kind of more prompt to app experience, which is great. Both have access to the graph, which we can use via connectors, but the connectivity for App Builder is only the graph. We don't have access to those 1,400 plus connectors or premium connectors that we have inside of Power Apps. And then the key difference here is where your data is stored. So since App Builder, that's included in your Microsoft 365 Copilot license. You don't need any Power Apps premium license for that. But because of that, you're just going to be able to get the graph data and SharePoint list as your data storage, right? So if you're already doing, customizing your SharePoint list with Power Apps, and that's all that you're doing, this could be a good option for you if you want to create richer user experiences and applications. There isn't really any baked in automation layer with this. It's pretty much kind of forms over data, kind of, point and click experiences that you would build with this versus Power Apps. As we know, we can integrate fully with Power Automate. And Power Apps, we have Dataverse as data storage or any of the other connectors, whether you want to have that be like Azure SQL or even SharePoint. And deployment, this is only to be deployed in Microsoft 365 Copilot for internal apps in App Builder, whereas Power Apps, we can use that on desktop, web, mobile, and Teams. And when we talk about governance with App Builder, it's only going to inherit Microsoft 365 and the basic admin monitoring, but we get the full kind of managed environments, ALM capability when we're using Power Apps. And then, so extensibility, there's really no extensibility story for App Builder, but there is, as we know, for full Power Apps. So App Builder in your Microsoft 365 Copilot license, good for really basic scenarios where you are comfortable with SharePoint List as your backend. You want a really nice UI, and you don't need a lot of tool integration. You just basically need a place to collect data and store that and access some graph data. So hopefully that kind of clarifies the waters a little bit between the two. So what scenarios are really a good choice for App Builder? Think of, personal productivity, as I mentioned. You want to have some kind of Scrum application, and maybe even has a timer built in to randomize the order to do your stand-up meetings. Maybe you host Tech Talks, and you want to have a kind of a personal scheduling application for tracking that or tracking your office inventory. You can do apps like a timeline application. So it is really good for, custom visuals. So if you want to see a timeline of key dates and releases that you have, or even this could be a great place where you go to just do an initial prototype. So say maybe you don't have full Power Apps licenses, but you think maybe a Power Apps application is the way to go. Maybe you want to use, like a code app or a vibe.powerapps type capability, but you don't want to commit to those licenses yet. You want to make sure you can get something that works. You can prototype in App Builder if you have Copilot and, get a feel for it and then move over to kind of a full version of Power Apps later. It's also good for fun scenarios. So how I've used this personally is for little quizzes that we might have. So for in our team meetings, when we open them up, I might create just like fun quizzes and really quick with a vibe coded app and App Builder that we have there. So lots of different use cases for this, depending on what you're trying to do. Now, as I mentioned, there's kind of for builders scenarios for vibe engineering and vibe coding, and then for developers. So if you're a builder, you're going to go, if we transition to the full Power Apps experience, so now you have that paid Power Apps license, you want to vibe code, you can do generative pages or vibe.power apps. And for our pro devs, you can do code apps and Power Pages, single page apps. So let's take a look at some of the full Power Apps experiences that we have here. Starting with generative pages. So this has been around for a while. This is specifically intended for your model-driven applications. And what it does is it gives you a prompt-based experience, and it generates React code for you based off of your prompt. And the code is completely editable. So let's switch over to a live demo, hoping that this works right here, and see what this looks like. So what you'll want to do is open up one of your model-driven apps. So what I have here is a hiring hub. So I'm going to open this in edit mode, and we'll see what generative pages looks like. So you don't have to, vibe code your whole app. This is a way for you to get really nice custom visuals just in maybe some of your existing model-driven applications. So if we look at what we have here, it's really basic, not a lot of custom formatting. I have a few different tables in here for my HR kind of hiring scenario. And I just really want this to look a little bit better. So what I'm going to do is we can go to add page. And one of the things you'll see here is now we have this new option to describe a page. And this is that generative pages experience. So it's going to initialize this control for us. And now we'll have this ability to describe our page. As far as models right now, it's only going to either use GPT-5 or 4.1. I suggest using the latest of GPT-5. And then we just put in our prompt. So what I would like to have is a responsive card gallery view of the table with some color coding to show recommendation and hiring decision and relevant info. Now, right now, this isn't going to do much because I need to tell it what table I want this to create this view for. So to do that, you notice we have this plus button. And I can attach images, which is cool. So if I have an idea already of the look I want, I can actually attach an image of that. It could even be like a hand sketched, or it could be, a mock-up that we have in Figma, whatever it might be, and I can attach that image. But also what I can do is add a table. So any table that you already have added in your model-driven app will show up here. And the table in question that I want this for is our job application table. So I reference that so it knows which table it's supposed to work with. Again, I don't have a mock-up, but I could attach that here as well. Another thing I'll point out is the tool, whether we want this to be able to generate images for us. So we'll leave that on. And let's just send this in and see what it does. So it's going to kind of take and it's going to make a plan. So it's analyzing its thoughts here about what it should do. And it's relatively fast. So you see it's already generating code. This is all React code behind the scenes that it's creating for me. Now it's going to switch over to the preview mode and we can see what it generates. So typically, it's sometimes leaves a little to be desired on what it generates, but we'll see what it does this time. Because it's always different each time that I go through this. Okay, so it's a pretty simple view. It's different than the kind of table view that we traditionally have. It's fine. If I didn't like it, I could keep going back and forth in the chat and refining it. I'm going to show you kind of another interesting take that I like to have on this because I'm more of a fan of the Anthropic models myself and Claude and Opus, but we can't use that right now in generative pages. But what we can do is, since we can see this code, I can copy all of this code and I can switch over to Visual Studio Code and I can use GitHub Copilot. So you can see what I've done here is I've asked it, can you take this code but make it look better with rich visuals? And I just pasted the code that the generative pages generated for me. So when I did that, if we scroll down to the conversation, it asked me some follow-up questions. So what I'm using here is that Opus model, which I think is a lot better for this type of thing. So it asked me kind of, did I want this to be bold and modern? What kind of assets do I want to have? Do I want to have like dividers, badges, tooltips? I gave it some feedback and it generated all of this code for me. So what I can do now, so it takes this context of this code, I can copy that. We'll go back to our generative pages, and in the code tab, I can edit this. So all of this, if I know what I'm doing and I know anything about React, I can make, kind of fine tweaks here so that I'm not having to go back and forth with the prompt for everything, because as we know, that burns a lot of tokens and usage. So the more manual updates we can make, the better. But I'm just going to replace everything here with what GitHub Copilot generated for me and hope that it should look a little bit better. So I just replaced the React code, I saved it, and it's going to generate the preview for me here in a second. There we go. Now this is more what I was looking for, right? I have kind of the total of the number of job applications, the number pending, and then I have a much better looking kind of card view for what I want. So again, you can use this to get started, build your generative page. If you're going back and forth and just not having a lot of luck in getting it to look exactly what you want, I would suggest you just switch over to GitHub Copilot, reference your code, and see if it can get you something a little bit better. So just a little trick I like to share. But if we're good with this page, right, we can just save that. And then we can just reference that in our model-driven app. We can give it a relevant name instead of generative page 3, I can say job app view. We can change the icon, everything that we can do there in our model-driven app, and then we're good to go. So that's an example of generative pages. There's a lot we can do with this. I'll show you another thing that I have done with this in our recruiting hub here. So let's actually go back over to apps. Let me play this Zava HR app. So that was kind of a simplistic one, but with that generative pages capability, you can create a really nice visual like this. So you can have kind of this column type formatting for your list view and all of that. Let me just sign in one more time. Oops, okay. We'll figure that out in a minute. There you go. So we have the column view and like percentages, kind of radio buttons there and color coding. So that's another example of some of the things that we can do there. All right, so that's generative pages. If you're using model-driven apps and you want better looking views and you don't want to have to write code yourself to do that, definitely check that out. So what else can we do here? So the other experience that we have is vibe.powerapps.com. So this is 100% prompt-based, and it's allowing you to build full React applications from scratch with that prompt-based experience. So if you're not already starting with a model-driven app and you want kind of more of a code application that you can just customize and host in Power Apps, then this is a good use case for that. So again, let's switch back over and we'll go to the vibe.powerapps experience here. So this is a new landing page. So how you'll get to this is if you're in your Power Apps portal, you'll notice this kind of new experience here. And I know someone in the chat was saying that it says it isn't available. You do have to explicitly enable this at your admin center level. So if you go into the Power Platform Admin Center, you have to enable the Vibe experience, and you have to enable it as well for each individual environment that you want to use this in. I have a video on that on my YouTube channel that shows you how to enable that if you want to reference that. So if you're not seeing it, that's probably why it's probably turned off at the admin level. But you can just say try it now, and that will open up this new URL, which is vibe.powerapps.com. So we're here. Now, what can we do? So again, as I mentioned, this is all prompt-based as far as what we can do. So we have these kind of starter prompts. So maybe you want like an RSVP management tool. Let's just go with that and see what it can do. Some other things too that I really like to point out is if you're starting with a very basic prompt, you can enhance it. Now, I don't know, I can use the RSVP tool one, but I love to get some audience participation here. If anyone wants to come off mute or put in the chat, like what's something that you would like to see if vibe.powerapps.com can build? I'll give a few minutes, see if anyone has some suggestions. Otherwise, we'll just go with the standard kind of out of the box things, but makes it more fun if you have some ideas. Okay. Employee onboarding. Okay, cool. We can do that. So I'll just put a very generic prompt in here. Create an employee onboarding application. And then what we'll do is we'll enhance the prompt. So this is actually going to use AI behind the scenes to take that and just add some additional detail that will help the AI model produce a better result, basically. So notice all the detail it added. So onboarding, what are the typical things that you're going to need, right? You need to be able to handle timelines and tasks, uploading documents, reminders, send messages and all that. So it added all of this detail for us, which is pretty good. So I'm going to just send that in and we'll let the experience go. Now, this isn't the fastest, so we'll see how far along we get with this as time allows, and we'll go from there. But so what it does is it's gathering the user requirements first. So it's using that same series of agents that we see if we've used the Plan Designer capability in the past. And it's going to kind of go through and build this out for us. Okay, so it's kind of working through the user requirements. And it'll give us a preview, and then we can just kind of keep editing with it. And one of the things too that I'll show as this is kind of building out, let's click out of this screen. There we go, is we have these different toggles. So we always at any time have the preview, but we can see the code behind the scenes. But one big thing I'll point out of this versus the generative pages experience is we can't actually manipulate the code right now with Vibe.Power Apps. I believe that's something that they're working on supporting eventually, but as of the current time, we can see the code, but if we want to edit anything, we have to go back and forth with the prompts. So do keep that in mind here. Another thing too, we have this nice split view, so I can see the preview and the code, which is really cool. So we can see it's kind of starting to build some simple artifacts for us. So it's got the configuration file there for what it wants to build. Now the other tabs, this is the app tab, but if we switch over to plan, it is using Plan Designer behind the scenes. So it went through the requirements and it defined our user roles of who would be using this onboarding solution, and it defined the data model. So what it's going to build for us is all these tables. So when you're using the Vibe.Power Apps experience, it's a premium Power Apps functionality. So it's going to store all of your data in Dataverse. And it's going to create these like an onboarding checklist, a task assignment message, and document table for us. And as far as technology, it's going to suggest an onboarding app, a reporting flow, and a task reminder flow. So we can toggle between all this. The data tab, we can actually see the data relationships here, so how they're all related and what it's going to be building for us. So it's done all that. Now it's doing the hard part of what Plan Designer in the past hasn't done for us, and actually calling this app builder agent. So if I expand this out, I can see all the individual tasks that it's doing. So right now it's going to generate the hooks and the models. Then it will do the CSS and a dashboard page and all of this for us. So it's doing a lot behind the scenes as it goes through this. Hopefully it won't take too much longer. Let me check if we have any other questions in the chat while we're waiting for this to run. I see one from Mike here. How is Dataverse storage allotted to citizen developers? Anything tied to their Copilot license? Yeah, so might have been in context there of the app builder agent experience, as we talked about. That doesn't use Dataverse or anything, so that's all built into your Copilot licensing. So no additional licensing is needed there. This experience we're looking at is premium Power Apps, so you need that premium license, which comes with its Dataverse storage allocation per user, per license, and all of that. And if you have any other questions while this is running, let me know in the chat. Happy to answer those. Do you run into issues if you go over 5,000 items on an app that uses SharePoint as a data source? Good question there. Because it's using full code in the app builder experience, you don't typically hit some of those same kind of limitations that we have there. I think it's better with like caching and stuff. So I need to try it out on something really big, like a 10, 20,000 item SharePoint list and see for sure. But I don't think you'll run into a lot of the same delegation type issues as we have in, say, a Canvas application, because it is using full code. Great questions. And if this doesn't finish up pretty soon, I have a different example of an application that I've already built. So we can take a look at that as well. But we can see the code wise, it has generated a little bit more code for us. We see all these hooks and models. So all this stuff that we don't have to do ourselves, it does it for us. And in the interest of time, let's go back over here. And I think I have another one I could show. Looks like it's getting pretty close though. And we can always refresh the preview too. So it's kind of still going. Give it a minute. And why that's running too, let me just quickly, we'll do two things at once. So let's go back over to Microsoft 365 Copilot, and I'll just show you the app builder experience because there's lots of questions on that. So this is part of the Frontier program. So your tenant will have to be a part of that for you to see this. But it is in the Copilot experience, and you'll see it in this Built by Microsoft section. And you'll have to add that agent to your Microsoft 365 Copilot instance once this is added. But once you see that, now you'll see this on the left-hand side, and this is where you can start. Oh, cool, it's logging me out now. Awesome. Let's see, let me get logged back in. Real quick. Okay, so this is kind of the experience that we'll have here. It looks like any other agent in Microsoft 365 Copilot, but same similar concept. So say that you want a quiz, right? So build an app where teams can take quizzes, track scores, allow me to set up custom quizzes, give away awards and all that. So I'll send that in at the same time, kind of have two things running and see which one finishes faster. Oh, cool. Perfect timing. So I segued. So we have our app builder running, but now we have our full vibe.powerapps.com preview here. So this is the app that it has generated for us. And we can do all of our testing here on this experience. So we see these tiles of like overdue items. Looks like I have the ability to add a new employee. Oh, cool. So this is fun stuff that you'll find. This is real life here. I don't like flashy demos where everything works perfectly. I like when stuff breaks. So this is where if we find something that's not working, you're going to have to go back and tell it. Now, one of the things that we can do for looking in here is we can select something. So we have this inline edit capability if we need to make those, but I can tell it, let's see, what's it doing? Cool. It's being super buggy because it won't let me type in the window here. Now it should save this for me, which is cool. So if I need to come back to it at any time, I can. Let's do a quick preview here. Oh, it's not quite done yet. So I have a preview, but it's not done building. That's why I can't type. So hopefully that error will be fixed soon. That's why we're getting a lot of 404s because it's not done building yet. So let's context switch. Let's see how this is doing. All right, that's still reasoning. That's the only downfall of live demoing this vibe coding stuff is, as you're seeing, it's not the fastest in the world, but that's okay. We can come back to it. Why this stuff is loading, as I mentioned in the context of time, let's kind of switch gears and talk about some of the other experiences, and we'll check back on how our agents are doing building our apps here in a minute. So we've looked at a little bit of the app builder. We'll come back and see what it generates. We've looked at vibe.powerapps, but what else do we have? Now, as I mentioned, the vibe.powerapps experience behind the scenes is actually building what we call a code application. So it's full React code that it's generating for us. We just don't have to actually manipulate the code. Now, code apps is a whole kind of third type of Power Apps. So when you think of the Power App spectrum, we have model-driven, we have Canvas, and we have code apps now. To generate code apps, again, this is another setting in your admin center that you'll have to enable. So if some of the stuff I'm not seeing, you're not seeing in your own environment, it just comes down to settings that have to be enabled in your admin portal. So there's a code app setting for this. Well, what it allows us to do is we'll take a quick look. So for this one, because it does take a long time and there's some setup, I got kind of a quick demonstration here. But with a true ProDev Code app, you would start in Visual Studio Code. So you would do things like, creating a new Code Apps project here. You can select your framework. So I want to React and I want to specifically TypeScript. So all of this is like very command line driven in VS Code, and it's building this application for us. And then we'll just simply deploy this into Power Apps. So I'll skip through some of the boring part. So we just basically scaffold an application, and we have complete control over the code here, right? So as you can see, I'm manipulating some of the things like the config. I'm going to install the Power Apps capability here and all the packages needed to make this a Power Apps code application. I can make some more changes here to add the app provider. Then we're going to connect here to Power Apps. So just scaffold a very simple demo app, scaffold it with Power Apps, and now it's connecting and giving me an endpoint that I can call to see what this would look like in Power Apps. So if you did any PCF development in the past, this should be really similar and familiar to you. So with Code Apps, we have access to the connector model. So you see me actually integrating with the connector, the weather connector in this case. So I'm going to run the Power Platform CLI, going to look at the list of connections and find my connection to the MSN weather connector in this case, so I can integrate it in my code app. So that's really all that we're doing here. I'm going to say, hey, add that connector, skip past all this, just to show you kind of an example. Now, where this gets really powerful is, yes, I can manually code all this, right? Which is great. But I can use GitHub Copilot, as I showed before, kind of integrating that with our model-driven app in the custom page. And so I can ask it, change the app to use the MSN weather connection to display weather details, use metrics, use the metric unit, and then Copilot can go to work and do all this for me without me having to manually write this code. So it is still vibe coding but just in this case, you're using GitHub Copilot to vibe code a code app that's going to be deployed to Power Apps. So it's doing its thing, modifying all that. We can see the code added here. We can accept the changes. And then now we're just going to connect again, get that preview URL to play and see what it would look like. And now we have a simple application that shows the weather, calling that Power Platform weather connector for us. So, pretty simple example, but obviously you can create really complex applications with this that you would then go and deploy in Power Apps. And again, the benefit, why would you do this versus just using GitHub Copilot and deploying to Azure or something? Well, A, when you want it to be an internal application, and then B, when you want to have the deployment already figured out and the security already figured out and not have to manage that. Those are really the use cases there. Some other things, so we can give our agents some time to work, is the whole concept of apps working with agents. So if you've used model-driven applications in the past, you've probably seen some agents added to your experience. So we have agents to help us with data entry, like the data entry agent, which we can copy and paste a big block of text or an email, and it will fill in intelligently using AI and the agent all the inputs in your model-driven app. So you see this little toolbar here where it says we can drop files or smart paste to Copilot and make suggestions. So we would just put that in there and it would automatically do the mapping with Form Assist. So another thing we can do, we can reference from Microsoft Graph specific files, chats, emails, where we want to get that information from. So it is fully integrated with all that. So I just selected a file there. It's going to look for suggestions, run the agent, and then we'll see that mapping kind of be previewed here. So we can make sure that it's all right based off of that data and then accept the suggestions. So these are just natively added into our Power Apps experience, nothing that we have to do to build this. And it just makes the end user experience for using an application that much better. We have ones for generating graphs too, for filtering data as well. Now the flip of that coin is also the concept of agents working with applications. We have a new Power Apps MCP server. So we see that we're using this and calling this in a Copilot Studio agent. So what we can do is we can toggle on specific capabilities of this Power Apps MCP server, and anything that you have in Power Apps, we can do things like invoke that data entry agent. So it's already an agent available in Power Apps to help us be able to get information from a long block of text and map it to the right field. And if we want to call that in an agent, we just call the MCP server. So lots we can do with this. Now, another really exciting development that was just made public preview, I think last week, is Microsoft 365 Copilot in Power Apps. So we've had this Copilot integration in Power Apps for a while, but honestly, it wasn't very good as it was. We could kind of ask some simple questions about our tables, but we had to be so specific in how we worded things, and it was really limited. So what they did to make that experience better is just like, hey, can we take the full Copilot experience and just embed that in our apps? And that's exactly what they did. So I can show kind of a quick example of this, and we can also check back in on how our agents are doing too. Oh, cool. All right, let me come back to Microsoft 365 Copilot integration. Now let's take a look at our vibe-coded vibe.powerapps.com app, because it looks like it has finished building the application. So let's just refresh the preview to make sure that we have the latest and greatest here. Cool. And if I add new, oh, cool. I add new employee and it actually works. No 404. I can kind of see the screen here, check if the filtering is working. It looks like it is. We have a screen to add new employees. That looks great. Looks like these I can edit and delete. We have checklist. Can create a new checklist item. I mean, really a fully functioning app. Now, some things that you can do that you might want to change here is you can point it to a copy of your brand standards and your brand coloring. So I see a question in the chat here from Chris. If you're using brand guide in SharePoint, can these Vibe apps use the branding? Yes, you could. You could reference that file, say, hey, use these standard colors, things like that, and it could change the color scheme based off of that. Notice another thing that it has too is we can change the view. So this is the HR manager view, but I can change it to the new employee view where I can see, okay, this is my timeline, my tasks, documents. So really a fully functioning app. It even has upload capability, which is really sweet. And then we would just go and back and forth with the prompting to refine this. So let's kind of save this so we don't lose our changes. And we'll publish it. So that looks pretty good. Now let's check in. Okay, this, oh no, app builder failed on us. That's no good. Let's try to refresh the little guy, and see if it can get us something going. But vibe.powerapps.com worked, which is great. We're going to save that. So that's an example of that. Now let's go back to this application here. So this was our Zava HR app, and let's look at that Microsoft 365 Copilot integration, because I think this is really going to make your end user experience that much better. And I don't know what this is doing. Let's see. Let me try reopening this. It's bugging out on me real quick. Let's see. Okay, maybe we'll look at this one. Let's see if I can get logged in real quick. One moment. There we go. All right. Wow, it's really making me authenticate and everything here, isn't it? Might not be able to demo this one if it's acting weird. Okay, something is going on here. My tenant is set to migrate today, and I'm really worried that they're migrating it as we speak. That could be the case. But I do have kind of you can look at the walkthrough here of what we're seeing, but some of the typical things that you can do is not only ask questions about your data, but I love the mix and match of being able to get context of your app data plus calling some of the agents. Like as you see here, you can generate visuals using the code interpreter functionality of Microsoft 365 Copilot. You could call the Word or PowerPoint agent. So like for this candidate, I can say, draft an email that summarizes kind of where we're at. I could say create a PowerPoint that shows for all candidates kind of where we're at in hiring. So lots we can do. I did just do a demo of this in full on the community call, so you can go check that out too, and see exactly what you can do. Okay, now let's segue so we can make sure we go through everything. With agents. So we have Copilot Studio, right? It's, our way of building agents. We looked a little bit at Agent Builder and talked about how that's kind of more for simple circumstances, of agents that you want, because you can just do instructions and knowledge. But with Copilot Studio, we can do things like building multi-agent systems. So this is really important because, as we know from building applications, building one app to rule them all isn't always the best case, right? That's why we have things like microservices, and we really tend to split out the applications we're building. The same pattern applies to agents that we build in Copilot Studio. So this is a capability that we have where we can, have these multi-agent systems. So we can have one agent that maybe is a specialist in analysis, another one that's a specialist in data entry, and they can call each other so that not only does this make it easier to manage, but it makes it easier to test as well and to update. So, think you don't have to take down your whole agent if one little thing is wrong. If you have it in a multi-agent system, then you can be working on the data entry part and everything else can still work, right? You can just toggle them on and off. Other things and investments lately that have been added is how do you make sure that your agents that you build in Copilot Studio actually work well for your use case before deploying them? This is very important. So one of the things that they released is this whole evaluations idea. So what you can do is do test sets. So it's kind of like unit testing for your agents. You can upload a CSV file with some data. You can generate specific questions, and it will run through those test cases automatically for you and give you a quality score. You can even have it do a text match and make sure that for what you're doing, that your agent is going to produce the right results. Another thing that we've recently got is more model choice. So you're starting to see a lot of those Anthropic models supported. So we see Sonnet right there, as well as the GPT models that we have, but we can choose and pick and choose which model that we want our agent to use. And that's another benefit of multi-agent as well. Maybe you have one that's using a Sonnet model and it's really good for deep reasoning, but you need another agent that's just basic general chat and uses a different model, right? So that's one thing that you can do with this. Now let's take a look kind of at an example of Copilot Studio and some multi-agent capabilities. So we'll switch over to Copilot Studio here. I'm going to switch my environment real quick. All right, so in our agents section, I'll just show you an agent that I've already built here. So we have a warehouse agent. Now, when we're building a multi-agent architecture, you're going to have one agent that's going to be your kind of parent agent. And in my case, it's this warehouse one. So pretty simple. I just want to be able to do things like, tracking inventory adjustments, recording delivery notes, and things like that. So for this agent, I wanted to use the 4.1 model. And now, as we can tell, like how this differs from Agent Builder is we get a lot more functionality. So with Agent Builder, all I could have done is customize these instructions and the knowledge. But with Copilot Studio, notice how we have this tools section. So if I go to add a tool, I can do things like integrate with Power Automate, which is what an agent flow is. So if I want to mix what an agent is good at, doing non-deterministic scenarios, like on the fly, coming up with a plan, making up what should happen next, with a more deterministic scenario, like, hey, anytime that I say we need to add an item into inventory, I want, or maybe get a discount for an item. I want to make sure that we get an approval for that. We shouldn't just be making, giving every customer a 50% discount on widgets. It should go through some kind of evaluation and approval from management. That would be a good use case where, hey, let's integrate with an agent flow in this case. And it's going to go through and use the out-of-the-box approvals. And it's going to say if this, then that, generate approval. If they approve, then cool, go on with the rest of your work agent. That's an example of some of the things we can do with Copilot Studio. We can also integrate with prompts. So if we want to do something very specific, like extracting data, summarizing, classifying data, we could call an AI prompt for that. Other things we can do, which is really important, is calling MCP servers. So MCP is really the preferred way to be able to integrate with third-party or custom APIs. So with MCP, it's better than a default connector because it has the context. That's what the C for MCP stands for, meaning that it's able to translate to the AI model when it should use what tool. So as you can see, if we click on MCP here, we have a lot of out-of-the-box MCP servers that we can plug and play in our Copilot Studio agents. So we can connect to WorkIQ, PowerApps MCP, as we talked about earlier. Learn has one if you want to get questions answered, like maybe you're building a help desk agent. GitHub, as well as some third-party like Databricks and DocuSign as well. So all of these you would just plug and play, and they're optimized for working with agents. But as you saw here, if I click on that, we can even do custom MCP servers that you built. So lots of integration capabilities that we have. So of course, we can still connect to all of those connectors. So those are all available here, as well as MCP flows. And then we even have something called computer use. Now this is really interesting because what if there's something that you want your agent to connect to, but it doesn't have an API that you can call? So this could be maybe a console application or just a website that you need to enter in data to that doesn't have some way to connect to via an API. Well, you can use a computer use agent, which is basically using robotic process automation to be able to create a virtual machine for you. And that will run through the clicks and the actions to execute what you need to do, like maybe adding data into a different website. So we get all of this additional capability. Now, the other big thing we get with Copilot Studio that we don't get with Agent Builder is this trigger capability. So this allows us to make our agents autonomous. So agents typically, are used where we have to have a conversation with them. Hey, do this, help me with that. We can make our agent run automatically for us, maybe on a schedule. So maybe we want to have a warehouse agent that runs every Friday and shows all items that are running low on stock, so we know what we need to refill. We could say, hey, add a recurrence trigger, and then we can set that recurring value. So we could say maybe this should run, once a day. It could be once a month, week, whatever you want. And then that basically uses Power Automate behind the scenes to have that trigger run, check for when it executes, and then just say, hey, once that happens, send data back to my agent, and so it can do its thing. So all of these capabilities we have as triggers. So we can trigger when a file is added in SharePoint or created, when we receive a Teams message, when an email is received, and all of that. So lots of things that we could do here to make our agents autonomous. Now, what we also have is multi-agent. So we can look in this agent here for the warehouse. I'm using multiple agent types. So when we look at these connected agents or this multi-agent architecture, we can either do a child agent, meaning that it's just kind of a lightweight agent that runs in your parent agent to do something specific, or we can have what's called a connected agent. So that's a totally independent agent that can run by itself, do its own thing, but also integrate with this agent. So it really just comes down to, in our case, we have a connected agent for inventory monitoring, and, we want that to be able to run on its own. So we might have another team that's just doing inventory monitoring, and that should be able to do its thing, but we also want to use it in this warehouse context. So that's kind of what we're doing with this multi-agent scenario. We're saying, hey, we want to use product inventory adjustment. This right here, record delivery and warehouse, is actually a computer use agent. And then this delivery note is a prompt. So we're using all these capabilities in this one agent. And then I see a question in the chat, which I guess Michelle already answered. Thank you, Michelle. But no, you don't need separate Power Automate RPA license to use computer use. So that's included in your Copilot license. So you can take advantage of that. If I look at the activity, so the computer use, it takes a long time to run. So I can't really do that live for you because it could literally take like an hour. But what I'll show here is this is where I ran this last. And what it's doing is, okay, so I ask it a question. I said, hey, here's a delivery note that I want you to process. So what the first thing it's doing is, okay, take your delivery note and run it through this prompt that I have that extracts some key information. And then it's going to call this record delivery. And this is just going to open up this other URL that I have to a system. And it's going to extract all that information that we have from our prompt for the delivery note and map it and add it to that system. So we can see that if we look at the history here, it started our computer, our virtual machine. So here's the kind of Windows VM. And now it's going to log in to this application. So this is kind of a screenshot here showing it logging into the browser. And I'll scroll down a little bit more so you can see it actually open up. There you go. So it logged in and it clicked in the new item button. So we can see that screen here. And now it's actually filling out all of the details, all for me using RPA in this computer use capability. So I can kind of follow along and see how it kind of finalized everything. And now we have our delivery note added into that system. So pretty powerful functionality that we have here. If we look at the tools, I'll just show you kind of the setup of it. But the setup is relatively simple. You just tell it, okay, what model do you want to use? And then you just put in instructions like you would for an agent. So I'm going to tell it, hey, open this URL to log in. Make sure to maximize the browser window, enter the username, password, and log in, click new delivery, put in the details. So I'm just giving it all the instructions of what it should do, and it's using that to fill it out. It does have some required inputs, so it needs that data that it needs to input, which I'm passing in here. And then this is where you can select the machine that it should use. So it could be either a hosted browser, it could use a cloud PC, or you could bring your own PC. So there's multiple setup options that you have here. Also, you can do human supervision. So if anything requires like confirmation, it can send a message in Outlook and ask for your response before it does anything. So it can store the credentials, and you can even do access control, like whether to only allow specific websites and all that. So all the configuration is just done here, right inside of Copilot Studio. And then I'll just show you again on the tools. This is the prompt, just so you can get a feel for what those look like. It's really the same thing. You just put in instructions. So what do you want to have happen? Hey, I'm going to give you a delivery note, and I want you to extract it as JSON so I can do the mapping and get the product details, the delivery details. And then I can match that. I can even use a concept of Dataverse grounding, saying based off of the details, match to a product, and then output it in the following format, which is this JSON format. So those are some examples of all the tools. All right, so let me see. Cool. I don't know if we're going to get our lovely app builder to work. This is Frontier. Frontier means it is still new and not always up to par, but I'm glad we got the vibe coding experience to work at least. So this is kind of some of the overview of Copilot Studio and the agents. I'll just show you the product inventory adjustment agent as well that we have, just so you can see what it's doing. But all we're asking it to do is to summarize operations and to carry that out. If you want to see how this works, to test it, I can say add inventory. Let's say add 10 items to inventory for, I think we have bucket hats. So I'll show you the kind of the thought process that it goes through as I put that in. So it's going to look through the tools and see kind of what does it need to call. So for the inventory, we have a specialized agent for that, and that's this product inventory adjustment child agent. So what it's doing is calling that child agent. Look like we don't have bucket hats, so I might have forgot what inventory items we have, but notice that it gives me a link here, and it's going to take me directly to our table so I can see what items we do have in inventory to make those adjustments. So let's get this open here. We actually have a model-driven app to store this information. Cool. So I'll see, okay, we don't have bucket hats, but we do have Zava Comfort Daily Polo. let's see, we'll try that. Add 10 inventory items. Let's see. Zava, comfort. Man, I cannot type today. What did I say that was? I'm already forgetting. Daily polo. Okay. Okay. So let's get an item that should actually exist, and we'll follow this agent along as it goes through. So again, calling that inventory adjustment agent, and what that agent is doing is it's calling a flow, because we need a deterministic scenario in this case to actually create the inventory adjustment, because we want to make sure each time it's doing the adjustment correctly. Oh, cool. Flow is airing out. Gotta love live demos. Let's see why it aired out. Okay, so one of the cool things too that we can do is, since this is just a flow, we can actually go into it behind the scenes, and we can use the out-of-the-box debugging just to show you how this would look like if you're trying to do this yourself. And so here's our flow. Oh, cool. It looks like it didn't even call it for some reason. So just to go to the designer to show you what it's doing, it's relatively simple. It looks like it's just not calling it correctly. But we're doing an inventory adjustment, so we're calling add a new row, and then just putting in the quantity, the adjustment name, and then the product type, and then responding back to the agent. So that's really all that we're doing there. I might just chalk this up as a loss rather than having to debug it, because we only have a few minutes left, and I want to have time for Q&A. So let me wrap us up here. So last thing too is really knowing that everything that you build in here, whether you're vibe coding, whether you're building agents in Copilot Studio, is in a fully managed platform. So we have the Power Platform Admin Center, where you can see analytics of, how many agents do you have out there, how many apps, what are they using, what connectors are being used, who has access, and all that, as well as new things like Agent 365 and the Copilot control system, where we can get really granular in managing these agents as we build. I did want to make sure that I leave you all with resources here. So particularly if you want to really dive deeper into Copilot Studio and some of the concepts I showed, like multi-agent and integrating with agent flows and prompts, a really good resource if you haven't checked it out already is Agent Academy. This is a full curriculum that myself and my team built that walks you through the basics of Copilot Studio. Assuming you know nothing, you need even to create your own developer environment, all the way towards building a multi-agent system with agent flows and prompts. So we have really kind of builds with you depending on where you're at and what you want to do. And we even have independent labs too that you can go through. So you can get to that at aka.ms/agent-academy and walk through that. It's at your free self-paced. You can get a free lab environment for that too, a trial environment. And then our Advocates Hub. We have a great video series out there, which we have a lot of the concepts I covered, like vibe coding and Power Apps covered. So definitely check that out. And I have a lot more on my YouTube, which I have down below. So with that, I think we have just a couple minutes here, maybe to answer if there's one or two questions before we need to wrap it up. No, that was a lot I threw at you at once. There's so much going on in AI and Power Apps and Power Platform.
Well, that was fantastic. I'm just gonna, round of applause, April. That was really amazing.
Yeah, sorry for the tenant issues there, but I think they are migrating my tenant as we speak and shutting it down. So the timing of that was not the best, but
No, that's all right. All right, does anybody have any questions that you didn't feel you got answered? I know, Chris, you definitely had a ton of questions. Do you have any that you want to come off mute while we have April for just a couple minutes? Or anyone else? Oh, yes, Frederick, already. How do we access the recording? Great question. Like I mentioned at the top of the meeting, is that we record these. We slice them up by message center updates by the first topic and the second topic, and then we put them on our YouTube channel. Give us about a week. I know that Don does a great job slicing them, editing them. So about a week is probably the expectation, Frederick. Any questions for April before we let her go?
April, I do have a question for you.
okay.
On I was building one of those agents and for SharePoint, and I'm noticing for the knowledge base, it only allows me to do document libraries. I can't do any site pages. Will that ever be available? Because we have like resource pages that have data on them as well.
And you're using the out of the box, like in SharePoint?
Yes, correct.
Yeah. I would imagine, I haven't seen the roadmap to know for sure to tell you, but you can reference an entire site in Copilot Studio. So that could be something to look at, is building the agent in Copilot Studio and referencing your SharePoint site there, because it will crawl everything in the site, including the page content.
Yeah, the problem with that is that we also have a working documents library in there. So those are documents that are in transition before being published. And so it would pick those up as well. But I can't exclude a library out of the knowledge.
Would the yeah, I'm trying to think how you would get around that for the working doc, because it does, it respects permissions. So if you have your permissions, yeah, or you hide it from search, for example, that could potentially get you around that. I wouldn't say that I would trust it 100%. You technically could prompt it in the instructions, and say something, but it's not going to be foolproof. It's really going to come down to, permissions, setting that, maybe hiding it from search, play around with those options and see if that could get you around it.
All right.
Yep. Yeah, good suggestion from Sherry there.
Yep, hide a library from search. All right, I think that's it. April, I'll go ahead and let you go. Thanks again to both of our speakers, April